Good morning, everybody. Happy Nirvana Day. So I'm going to keep this a bit short this morning because we have lots to do. Lots to do today. So since this year, we are taking a closer look at the Soto Zen tradition as a whole. Today we can take, I think, an opportunity to see how Nirvana Day is carried out in the temple in its most traditional form. So what's that story? What are we chanting? How does it fit into the liturgical year? How do we understand the meaning of what we're doing? Don't worry, I'm not going to suggest that we do all of these things here. But having that context is helpful, right? So I'm going to take the traditional ceremonies, a bit of a loose road map, but I'm going to take some side roads and talk about some various sort of unrelated things, right? So here we do a much simplified observance, which is more appropriate for who we are and where we are. But because Nehan-e, or Nirvana Day, is one of the Sanbuki, the 3 Buddha days, it's a really important occasion within the Soto Zen tradition. So remember, we've got 3 Buddha days: his birth, his awakening, and his death. So Nirvana Day, of course, is the observance of the death of Buddha's physical body and his entering Nirvana. Right from the beginning, that poses a conundrum for us, right? He's already entered Nirvana with his experience of awakening, fully awakening under the Bodhi tree, right? Nirvana is not separate from that. So he already fully knew that Nirvana and samsara are both right here, right? There was nowhere for him to go. So this idea of physical death and entering into Nirvana is a conundrum, right? It's a paradox for us. So he continues to live out his karma in his physical body, this collection of 5 skandhas, until the age of 80. And we call this, or the tradition calls this, nirvana with remainder, or nirvana with body, but nirvana with remainder. So he still has a physical form, right? His karma is still playing out. So parinirvana is the final death, the complete blowing out. We know the roots of the word nirvana are about blowing something out, right? The complete blowing out of a Buddha, or an enlightened being. It's the end of the physical body and the cycle of rebirth in the 6 realms of samsara, the rokudo, right? This transmigration. So this is complete liberation from suffering. We call this nirvana without remainder, right? Physical body, karma has kind of played itself out. Now we're nirvana without remainder, so there's no longer a physical form. So in early teachings, Theravadan teachings, you move from nirvana with remainder, nirvana in the body, awakening in your lifetime, to nirvana without remainder, leaving the physical realms of samsara, not being reborn into this cycle of suffering kind of ever again. So the Mahayana view is a little bit different, right? Soto Zen is under the umbrella of Mahayana Buddhism, Buddhist tradition. So for us, parinirvana is not just complete extinction, complete disappearance, right? Completely cutting something off. We can see it as the ultimate realization of Buddha's sort of eternal, unchanging nature. This is Dharmakaya, right? The Dharma body of Buddha. So it's not that nirvana with a body is somehow less than perfect. Oh, well, this is a stage towards something. Or, oh, well, this is not quite the real thing. That's not what's going on. It's not like nirvana with a body is not the real thing. Nirvana without the body is the real thing. It would be easy to think that with a body, we still have all the delusion and confusion and 3 poisons and greed, anger, ignorance, all that stuff, and that somehow we have to completely reject that condition, that human condition, and physically die in order to achieve nirvana, right? It would be easy for our logic to take us that way. So instead, what Dogen and our other ancestors tell us is, without getting rid of delusion, somehow we are already in nirvana, right? Somehow, even in this deluded physical form, which has suffering and 3 poisons and all that stuff, somehow, without getting rid of delusion, we're already in nirvana, because nirvana is the world of reality in which we're living here and now. There is nowhere else that we can be living. There's no other circumstance in which we can be living. So it can't be separate, right? So Dogen says in Shoji, or Birth and Death fascicle, that if you can understand that birth and death are nirvana itself, there is not only no necessity to avoid them, but also nothing to search for that is called nirvana, right? So we don't need to get rid of the physical body. We don't need to be doing ascetic practice, which is somehow mortifying the flesh, right? That is not what our practice is about. So nirvana with a body is where we all are now, right? If we're already in the middle of nirvana, nirvana with a body is something we're experiencing right now. There's also the body of Buddha that is simply the Dharma, simply the way the world functions, the way the universe does what the universe does, is also Buddha's body, which I think is both interesting and comforting in a particular way, right? This Dharma body of Buddha, or Dharmakaya, is still here, even though Shakyamuni's physical body hasn't been in the physical world for 2,600 years, and yet somehow this Dharmakaya is still here. So in the Samyutta Nikaya, somebody says to the Buddha that he's wanted to come and see him for a long time, right? He plops himself down in front of Buddha and says, I've been wanting to come and visit you for a really long time, but somehow I haven't been well enough, right? I've just not been physically able to make that trip and visit you. And Buddha says, well, it doesn't mean anything to just come and look at my physical body. What are you doing? Right? There's no meaning to that. One who sees the Dharma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dharma. So if we're going to go and throw ourselves down in front of Buddha, his physical form, what are we looking for that we don't already have access to, right? Or somehow that we're not already in touch with, right? So it makes me think about, when I review this, it kind of makes me think about our impulse, for instance, to go travel someplace to sit sesshin with a really important teacher or a really famous teacher. We're going to sit down for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, looking at a wall. What are we doing? Simply having somebody in the room, is that enough? I don't know, maybe it is. And I say that, of course, given what Sanshin's history is. We had people coming from all over the world to sit facing a wall with Toto-san. So it sometimes made me think, what are we doing? One who sees the Dharma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dharma. So we don't need to go anywhere else to find Buddha or the Dharma or Nirvana, right? It's all right here. So in fact, one of the echo in the traditional Nirvana Day ceremony says, the pure body of the Dharma realm fundamentally has no emerging or disappearing. The power of the vow of great compassion is manifest throughout the goings and comings of birth and death. So in the training temple on February 15th, February 15th is the official Nirvana Day. Preparations actually start February 1st, right? So this is kind of a big deal. And preparations start 2 weeks ahead of time. So for 2 weeks, the evening service changes from the usual texts to something called the Sutra of the Condensed Teachings left by the Buddha upon his final nirvana, and the Sharidaimon, which we'll also do here shortly for our own service, right? So on February 14th, the day before Nirvana Day, the Jikido hangs up a scroll with the image of Buddha's parinirvana, hangs that on the altar. So here we have this one, and we've got another one on that altar over there. So we have an image of this thing, right? This kind of picture is called Nehanzu. Nehanzu. So as a preview of our discussion later this year on symbolism and iconography, we'll be doing in the fall, parinirvana is usually represented by a reclining Buddha, as these two are, right? He's always on his right side, with his head supported by his hands or by a pillow or something. So you've probably seen that image around. There are many large and famous statues, for instance, around Asia of the reclining Buddha. Some of these things are massive. They are huge, right? Sometimes on the soles of the feet of those major statues, you might see auspicious symbols like lotus flowers, right? White elephants, maybe the Dharma wheel. So in pictures, Buddha's lying on his right side in this grove of sala trees. So usually his head's toward the north and his face is toward the west, and he's surrounded by weeping beings. These are gods and humans and animals. All these beings are surrounding him, weeping and weeping. So those weeping characters are symbols of imperfect understanding. These are not people who understand, if you see the Dharma, you see me. They're attached to Buddha's physical form. Oh my gosh, Buddha's physical form is dying. What are we going to do? So they don't understand that parinirvana in this way is liberation, liberation from suffering. So in this picture, there are also often some bodhisattvas looking very serene, looking very calm. They represent awakening because they are not mourning and crying and weeping. They do understand parinirvana is liberation, and if you see the Dharma, you see the Buddha. So they are not grieving in that way. So I noticed that Zen Shuji in Los Angeles just commissioned a few years ago a new Neihanzu, right? A new image of Buddha's parinirvana from a contemporary artist, interestingly, a contemporary female Japanese artist, right? This thing is about 6 feet by 8 feet. It is huge. It's full of bright colors. It looks traditional, but it also looks contemporary. It's really an interesting expression, right, of contemporary practice in that way. So I have linked it from Sanshin source. So if you go to the What's New section on the homepage, you'll see I've started a page for Nirvana Day where we can collect resources, and I've got a link to that image so you can look at it and how it was created and the ceremonial things they did around this image, right? So it's really interesting. This is a very old tradition, and yet we are still figuring out how do we express our understanding, right, of Buddha's nirvana. So interesting, I think. So here's an interesting diversion, right? When we go to the training temple and we're doing our training to become authorized good little clergy, we sleep in the zendo. We sleep in the zendo supposedly the same way, the same posture of Buddha's parinirvana. So we're supposed to sleep on our side, on the right side. This is known as a lion's pose or nirvana pose. We are supposed to recreate or embody Buddha's final rest every night when we're sleeping in the Senmon Soto. Head toward the altar. So of course we're supposed to be keeping zazen in mind all the time, right? Even when we're sleeping. If we're really practicing training, we're in a formal situation, right? We should have zazen in mind all the time, even when we're asleep. So the gata we say before we go to sleep is, going to sleep this night, I vow with all beings to calm all things, making the mind clear and pure. So this reclining posture is supposed to help us stay connected to Buddha's mind, keeping our minds clear and pure, even while we're sleeping, where we would think we don't have much control over what's happening there, right? So I just think that's interesting. When we sleep, we're embodying Buddha's death. And we can just think about maybe what that means for us, right? Okay, so also on the day before Nirvana Day, the abbot and the Ino are busy preparing a formal statement that gets to be read during the ceremony. Everybody hears a final sort of formal reading of this last teaching sutra, which we will hear a bit of during our own ceremony. And then on the day itself, there's a highly choreographed ceremony with lots of offerings, drums and cymbals, and lots of sound. Everybody's burning incense. Everyone's doing 9 full prostrations. We chant the 10 names of Buddha. And we chant a text called The Great Buddha's Ushnisha Heroic March Dharani of the 10,000 Practices. How's that for a mouthful? And not only do we chant this big long sutra, but we do it while we're circumambulating. What does that mean? We're walking around. We're walking and chanting at the same time. So if you think you're having trouble sitting and chanting, imagine, because there's a path, right? And there's a way we do that. So we have 3 forms of chanting in this tradition, right? We have sitting, standing, and circumambulating, or walking around the hall. So originally this walking was done, of course, around a stupa, or around an image of Buddha. There's a respectful thing about that. You always walk with this shoulder toward the Buddha or the stupa. Why? Because the shoulder is uncovered, you're ready to serve. There's a whole thing about that. So now we do it by making a circle with these kind of serpentine bends next to the altar or in front of the altar. So it's usually 4 rows of people, 2 rows on each side. It could be more complicated, 6 or 8 rows sometimes, if you have a really, really big hatto and lots of people. So imagine what that's like, all these people chanting and walking. There's something kind of powerful about that. So again, highly choreographed. There are bells for when to start. There's bells for when to stop. You have to watch where you are, how close you are to the people around you. You have to not step supposedly on the edges of the tatami, because we're walking on tatami mats. You can't step on the edge of the tatami, so you need to know where your feet are. You need to stop at your own place at the right time, and doing this while you're chanting. And if you have the thing memorized, that's good. And maybe you're actually doing this for the book, right? So we do this for big ancestor memorials and other kinds of important occasions, right? So we're not doing that here. Just know, if you go online perhaps and find a similar ceremony and you watch what they're doing, ching, they all get up and they start walking around. That's what's going on. So this great Buddha's Ushnisha heroic march to Rani of the 10,000 practices comes from the Shurangama Sutra. So in the course of history, there has been a debate over whether this sutra is really an authentic Indian sutra or whether it's Chinese. There's arguments being made on both sides. Dogen thought it was not authentically Indian, but he commented on it anyway and quoted from it anyway, with the idea that if our ancestors continue to teach it, then that alone makes it Dharma. That alone makes it legit, right? If our ancestors are continuing to talk about this thing, that alone makes it real. So the sutra covers a lot of ground, but a few of the main themes are the need to engage in sitting practice, not surprising, and to keep the precepts, also not surprising. But to do these things, not just to study the Dharma, but to actually do something with the body, to keep the precepts and to do the sitting practice. It also deals with how to deal with delusion and the stuff that comes up, right, during our sitting practice. All this being the roadmap for the heroic march toward Buddhahood, or toward awakening. This is the heroic march that we're talking about, right? How do we move closer and closer to awakening? So this sutra was supposed to have come from above the crown on the great Buddha's head. And this is where the Ushnisha comes in. So again, to preview our look at iconography later in the year, we can at least understand something about Ushnisha. You've probably heard about this or read about this thing on his head, right? In early Indian art, the Buddha's Ushnisha looks like a top knot, like a bun, right, made out of his hair. By the time we get to Soto Zen, it's usually just this smooth, rounded bump on his head. So if you look at our altar, you see he's got a bump on his head. If you have Shakyamuni at home, probably have the same thing, right? So sometimes there's a jewel in the center of this thing. It's all about wisdom, Buddha's wisdom. So this is one of the 32 special physical characteristics of a Buddha, all right? This is how we know a Buddha. The long earlobes and the golden skin and the blue eyes and all these things, and the Ushnisha is one of those things. So again, wisdom, awakening. So sometimes this sort of figure is positioned as a reminder for us that Buddha's physical form is a manifestation of awakening, right? So if we're looking at, when there's three kinds of Buddha, right? There's a manifesting and a maintaining and an absolute Buddha. So if we're looking at the maintaining Buddha, there we go. We've got a nice picture. Somebody's got a nice picture online of our Shakyamuni. It can be helpful to just, how do we practice with the sort of maintaining Buddha figure? One way to practice with that is this is, a reminder that Buddha's physical form is a manifestation of his awakening. So this is beyond simply being a human body. We put this form on the altar to remind us of the direction of our practice, remind us of our aspiration. So thank you to Sawyer for pointing out our altar to people at home. So there's an esoteric interpretation of this Ushnisha in which it's personified as a deity, its own deity, right? It gets described as a crown. This is the crowning power of Buddha's wisdom. So this is why, coming back to this sutra, this is supposed to have been delivered above the Buddha's crown on his head. So anyway, to return to the ceremony. The end of the chanting, the end of the circumambulation, we dedicate the merit to Shakyamuni on his Nirvana day. We always dedicate the merit of a sutra. When we chant it, it's not for us, although we get something out of it. We dedicate that merit to somebody. In this case, on this particular day, we're dedicating to Shakyamuni. And then there's a final statement, which is fairly long, and I just want to look at a few small sections of that, right? The faint moon that eternally resides over Vulture Peak has a subtle brightness that glimmers from afar. The flowers that remain on the 2 trees of Nirvana have a lingering aroma that is still fragrant. The salvation that is the eternal ease of Nirvana extends down to the present. The efficacy of the true aspect of the unconditioned reaches into the future. So these are 4 images that make the point that even though the physical Shakyamuni is gone, Buddha is still here because we are practicing. We are, the Dharma is doing what the Dharma does. We are still carrying out Buddha's practice. So the first one, the faint moon that eternally resides over Vulture Peak has a subtle brightness that glimmers from afar. So the moon is, of course, often a symbol of awakening in this tradition, right? We know that Vulture Peak was the site of that famous story where the Buddha holds up a flower. He doesn't say anything. Mahakashyapa smiles. This is the first transmission of the Dharma, right? This wordless transmission of the Dharma. So Vulture Peak is where that happens. So this is not conveyed by anything the Buddha says. This is direct experience of reality within the shared awakening of, in the story, these two practitioners, right? Shakyamuni and Mahakashapa are in this sort of a shared space of awakening, right? He holds up a flower, Mahakashapa gets it, and he smiles. So this is the faint moon over Vulture Peak, right? It's still shiny because that transmission has continued down to today. If we look at our lineage, yes, it's apocryphal, but okay. That transmission has happened all the way down to our founder, to me, to some of you, right? The flowers that remain on the two trees of Nirvana have a lingering aroma that is still fragrant. So Buddha passed away under the two sala trees near the town of Kushinagara. So if you do formal meal chants here, there's a place where we say here he was born, he had this awakening, here's where he died. We talk about Kushinagara. So this is an important flowering tree in the Buddhist tradition, the sala tree, because Queen Maya supposedly held on to a sala branch while she was giving birth for support, right, during Siddhartha's birth. And that loop is closed, I think, when we notice that he dies under the same kind of tree. I'm guessing that's not an accident. Right? When we just simply look at his life story, we go, oh, here's two places where this tree shows up. So not only the flowers have fragrance, but the resin is also fragrant. It's used to make incense. So that lingering aroma is still fragrant because the effect of Buddha's life and death are still here. The salvation that is the eternal ease of nirvana extends down to the present. So I think it's important that the statement says the eternal ease of nirvana, eternal rather than permanent. Everything is changing, our physical bodies are changing, our activities, right, our understanding, everything's changing all the time, and yet we can still experience the eternal ease of nirvana. So in the midst of impermanence, there is this eternal ease of nirvana. So nirvana, of course, is not a state. It's not something we achieve and then we sort of own permanently. Even though the Dharma is functioning and moving continuously, we know everything's in motion all the time. Somehow, in the midst of that, the ease of nirvana is eternal. So when Shakyamuni experienced awakening under the tree, under the Bodhi tree, he was liberated from suffering during the rest of his physical life as his karma is playing out. And when his body died, he was no less within nirvana. And that's the same nirvana that we swim around in today. We're all in that same space, right? His life story still resonates with us. We still identify with Buddha because we're all doing the same practice. We're all living within the same space. We're all functioning within the same Dharma, right? There is really no separation. The efficacy of the true aspect of the unconditioned reaches into the future. So I think efficacy is an interesting word choice here. It's an interesting translation. I don't know what the original was. I didn't look it up. Efficacy. Efficacy usually has to do with sort of producing a desired result, right? And we hear something like that in this practice and all kinds of flags go up. Zazen has no goal, right? Zazen's good for nothing. What are we talking about? I think we can understand efficacy here as total dynamic functioning. The continuous, unhindered, total functioning of the Dharma or of the universe, right? The reality of emptiness isn't bounded by time and space. The reality of Buddha's awakening and practice and the reality of his understanding of the Dharma and his transmission of the Dharma reaches into the future because there's nothing outside of this moment, right? There is no boundary around that. So we can relate this to the way, as I say, our immediate ancestors talk about Zazen. Zazen's good for nothing. If there was something we were going to get from it, some reward that was coming over the hill, if we just practice enough, right? That reward would come in some time and place and space that is not here and now, and we know that can't be. There isn't anything that's separate from here and now. So we know that's a problem. So we can connect Zazen and total dynamic functioning and say that the efficacy of Zazen, like the efficacy of emptiness, isn't about producing a desired result. In this case, we're not talking about something that leads to an outcome. It's simply about functioning according to the Dharma, according to the laws of the universe. We just spent a whole year talking about food, clothing, and shelter as it functions within or related to the Dharma, right? functioning according to the Dharma. Statement goes on to say that this continuing effect is the reason for coming together and making offerings and doing this sort of ceremony in observance of Buddha's parinirvana, and that we do that not as individuals, but as part of this continuous universal functioning. So we look around the room for a ceremony and go, yeah, there's 15 people or 20 people or 200 people, individuals, right? And yet, if we're really engaged in that liturgy, there are not 200 separate people or 12 separate people. There's a line in this statement that I really like that says, person by person, with different mouths, but with a unified sound, we perform this Buddha rite, chanting the Dharani. Person by person, with different mouths, but a unified sound, we perform this Buddha rite. So the kanji for unified sound here is do-on, not do-on. Do-on, right? Do is equal or the same. On is sound. Kanon, that on. You know, here's the cries, here's the sound of the world, same sound. So it means doing something in unison. Speaking with one voice, right? Acting as one being, sort of. So when we do this ceremony and we chant for Buddha, we are not really separate from Buddha. We're also not separate from each other. There is a single universal something happening here, and it's not magic, right? Sometimes in the past, Toto-san has used the example of if you have a symphony, you have individual people with individual instruments, but they're making one music. And it's the same kind of thing here. I love that example. So we're not separate from Buddha. We're not separate from each other. We're just, we're all functioning together across time and space. We could actually say we're not separate from all the people who've come before us and done that ceremony every year. Whether that's here where we've only been around for 20-something years, or it's, the temple where I trained that was 800 years old. There's something about we're all in that same space, which is interesting. So I want to just take a few minutes before we end to talk about what we are actually going to do here ourselves shortly, because I've added, guess what? I've added a few things this year. And plus, people just don't remember from year to year the things that we do. So Doju, who got up and left, is going to put some food and tea and other things, offerings on the altar. There is a formal way to do that, but it requires several people, and it takes a bit of time. So here at Sanshin, we have always just done that a bit informally, made those offerings before the ceremony. So we're going to line up on two sides of the altar, one line here and one line here. Sawyer's going to serve as our Doan, Myogen's going to serve as our Ino, so we're under the direction of these two. Doshi comes in, makes the offering, 3 bows, Sampai as usual, Heart Sutra, so we'll need to get chant books for people who want to read Heart Sutra, as usual. Then we do the Sharidaimon, or the verse of paying homage to Buddha's relics. We're going to do that 3 times, once in Sino-Japanese, once in English, once in Sino-Japanese. So folks at home, if you don't have it in front of you, go out to Sanshin Source, look at our liturgy page. I think it's posted there. If you have trouble, please help each other in the chat, because I know a few of you know where it is. I think Abby's got hers in front of her, right? So we're going to, anyway, we're going to do that. At the end of the verse each time, we're all going to do 1 full bow. You might remember that from past years, right? We chant, Gatsu, we all do 1 full bow. We do the next time, 1 full bow. We do the third time, 1 full bow. Myogen is going to do a dedication of merit, an echo, right? Then we're going to do all Buddhas, 10 directions 3 times, as we do. End with our usual 3 bows. Doshi exits. Then we each go up to the altar and make our incense offering. We know how to do that, right? Same as world peace, only we're doing it here. So same pattern. Everybody knows what that looks like, I think. If not, we will help you, don't worry. While you're up here, make your incense offering, make your bow, pick up a candle from the side of the altar. Take that back to your seat with you. When everybody has a candle, then somebody, I'm not sure who, is going to light the candle of the first person on each side, and that person's going to light the next one, and that person's going to light the next one, and we're going to have a wave of candle lighting that goes from the altar, right, all the way out. What are we doing? We are enacting the ongoing transmission of awakening, or wisdom, right, from Buddha to each of us. And in this particular Sangha, we don't line up in order of seniority or Dharma age. It doesn't matter. Someone who's here for the first time can transmit that Dharma to someone who's been practicing for 30 years, which is really cool. So we get to receive that transmission in a real and physical way, right? Someone's going to light my candle, I'm going to light your candle. There's something very, like enacting and embodying that is really interesting. So we also get to see that this Dharma flows outward, this awakening flows outward to everybody. If we look around and we see everybody in the room has a little wisdom light, right? Everybody in the room. Nobody's left out. So when everyone has a lit candle, then I'm going to read the last part of this Sutra of Buddha's Last Teaching, which is the text I mentioned earlier. It gets chanted every evening for 2 weeks before this ceremony, so we'll do it once. I'm going to do it from outside the zendo. There are times as clergy where we stand in for Buddha. We are the voice of Buddha, right? So things like giving precepts, ordaining novices, we sit up here, right? We're channeling Buddha. There's times where you stand here and do Dharma words. You're the voice of Buddha. So, in this case, I'll be the voice of Buddha, giving final instructions to practitioners. After a bit of silence, Yogin's going to put out his candle. We're all going to put out our candles. We're going to quietly move into announcements, logistics, things we need to do. Ring out the Sangha, final 2 rings to ring out the Sangha, and lunchtime, right? So overall, the message of the day is that we are really fortunate to have met up with Buddha in this lifetime, to be able to encounter the Dharma, to learn how to practice, to find a Sangha. We can be grateful for the opportunity to be focused on realizing awakening ourselves. Maybe we're doing that at home, and maybe we're doing that here, but somehow we've all come together. We get to focus on really trying to understand the nature of reality. That's a big project. That's not something we can easily do on our own, right? So we only live in these bodies for a relatively short period of time. I know for myself, I'm at the age where I'm actually starting to think about my own mortality. How much Dharma work can I get done in the remaining 10 or 20 years, right? So there's no time to waste. If we put off practicing, we might not get another chance. So we can have some gratitude for the opportunity and then think about how do we use that opportunity wisely, right? Buddha left us some teachings, and there is a Dharmakaya, and Buddha continues to point the way for us in the way that he can, but we have to do the job ourselves, right? We can't rely on somebody else to do our awakening for us. So that's our orientation for today. What questions, reflections, comments do you have before we move into, I was going to keep that short and I didn't keep it terribly short, before we move into the rest of the activities for the day? It's fine to ask about the ceremony. This is the time we can work stuff out, but also to talk about the larger teachings around Buddha and his life and death. Folks in the room, let's start with you. Anything you'd like to say or ask? Yogi, please.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay.
I find this interesting. When I first started out as a Buddhist, I was a Tibetan Buddhist in the Karma-Kagyu tradition. Their abbot in the U.S. is a Karma-Kaya Triana, Karma Triana Dharmakaya. And the first question I ever had asked me was, what does that mean? I'm still trying to figure it out. But one of the things that I find interesting is in the things that you were talking, in relation to that name, for the Triana Dharmakaya, the 3 names, Nirvana-kaya, Sambhogakaya, and Brahmakaya. One of the things that I find interesting is where's karma come into this? And as you were talking, the one that kind of makes sense with Dharmakaya is karma is impermanent. And the best thing about that means you can change. Mm-hmm. You can be enveloped in this world with all the crap that you deal with. And you know the crap I deal with. People here know what I deal with. And it's your karma. It's what you're building. But at that same time, you can change it. Mm-hmm. And it changes naturally. Mm-hmm. And it's the thing I like to think about it, it's really simple. It can be something as subtle as a simple bow. Mm-hmm. You take your entire focus, you bring it, you bow. And later on, you envelop that into other karma and whatnot. And that changes the Dharma. That changes the reality that we have. So that was just my comment.
Yeah. So we have agency. It's important, right? It's important
Yes.
to know we have agency. We get to make choices. How do we make those choices? Well, we study precepts and we try to figure out what skillful action is, right? And there are times where we certainly feel like the universe is just dumping on us and there's no escape. And, I try to be a good person, yet bad things happen to me and somehow I feel like I don't have agency. And it's really useful. At least it's been for me in my own practice. When I feel like that, step back. Okay, wait a minute, really? Is there really no choice you have in this moment? Even if your choice is, how am I simply going to get up in the morning and do the next thing? We've always got agency. We always get to choose. We're never actually powerless. We just have to carefully frame how we think about that, how we understand that, right? So thank you for that. That's helpful. Other comments, questions, reflections from people here, physically here?
Please. Pointing this out, this is really interesting. You mentioned Queen Maya, the mother of Buddha. You also know that Maya is a Sanskrit word in Hinduism for illusion. Buddha is just a title, it means awakening. So when Buddha is awake, Maya dies.
Yes, and isn't that an interesting linguistic phenomenon? Isn't that an interesting way to practice with that and think about that? Yeah. Other things here? Sawyer, please.
So I had an interesting conversation with someone yesterday. Sort of, they were asking about what we're going to do tomorrow here. Just a friend. And as I was explaining, sort of like, well, we're marking the passing away of the Buddha, and I struggled to decide whether to call it a somber occasion or a celebratory occasion.
Yeah.
And I see that in how you were describing how some folks at the Buddha's death were, distraught. His sangha was they were losing their teacher. They felt they were losing their teacher. And then the ones who were sort of, who had seen through to the bottom of what was really happening were not suffering in that occasion.
Right.
And so as I started to explain this to my friend, like, it's sort of like the Buddha actually reached the final goal in a certain way, traditionally.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, so it's kind of like Buddha's retirement ceremony. Wow, that's a kind of a helpful way to look at it. It's at least it marks an ending, but also a kind of like taking up by the next generation, and a continuity and a somberness, but also a joy.
Yeah. I think if we really understand the nature of this observance in our tradition, it's a really moving thing, right? It continues to amaze me that somebody, Toto-san or I, can sit here every single year and say something about this that we haven't said yet. Like, how? What other depths can we plumb out of this thing? And it's just such a juicy story, right? I have sometimes on an occasion like this talked about so the teacher disappears, what does that mean? People start weeping I've had people weeping in the audience because like, oh my gosh, that feels really immediate. And for some of them, they've had that experience, right? That just feels really immediate. So you can imagine how these beings standing around Buddha's physical body are feeling about that. So on the one hand, you can't say to someone, well, don't grieve, that's not enlightened. Well, oh no! I mean, that's not kind. The reality of this human condition is we have attachments to human beings, and when those human beings change or leave, we're going to have some feeling about that. It's not that that's an evil thing. How do we understand it? Right? We're feeling what we're feeling. That's the reality. These beings are grieving. They've lost their teacher. That's the reality. And yet, how do we understand that as a real opportunity for practice? So that is not an invitation to spiritual bypassing. That's an invitation to really looking very carefully at what's going on. So anyway, I think there's a reason we have Sanbuki, right? We have 3 Buddha days, because we can sit here every single year and say something about Buddha's birth, and say something about Buddha's awakening, and say something about Buddha's death, and there's still something in that very human experience that is moving and meaningful, right? Is it a sad occasion or a joyful occasion? I mean, when I sat down here and said Happy Nirvana Day, I kind of went, wait a minute. Like, really? But in a way, sure, because we're thinking about our own heroic march to Buddhahood. Not that that's not already here, right? So it just gives us there's so many Dharma gates. And when you have to explain to somebody who's outside the tradition, that is a whole interesting exercise, right?
Yeah, and also if I remember right, I think on one of the occasions when Dogen himself was like talking on Nirvana Day, and he writes like some little 4-line poems about the occasion, and I think in one of them he sort of like, I don't know, like aligns himself with the grievers.
Yes, he does.
Like he said and that could be a whole Dharma talk, I'm sure, but...
And has been. Yeah, well, that's right. And you kind of don't expect that from Dogen. You expect him to say, rise above it, or something. And he's going, oh, no. I get it. I'm grieving for Buddha too, right? It humanizes Dogen, but I think it gives us permission to be very present with what's actually happening. Nobody's saying when somebody died, when my cat died, did I grieve? You bet. And at the same time, intellectually, I knew all the teachings that go with that, right? And at the same time, was that hard? Yeah, it was. So we get to hold both of those things. And I think these kind of stories within the life of Buddha and within the sort of liturgical year give us a chance to sort of give ourselves permission, right? To hold both of those things. Please.
Yeah, this reminds me of Suiko passing.
Yeah.
For everybody who doesn't know here, Suiko was my original teacher, and before I could ordain, she passed away, and Hoko was happy enough to pick up the torch and hit me with it. And
well, Zuiko was a mentor of mine for 30 years, so yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful lady, and she's part of a book right now by Jinshu Roberts about Genjo Koan. Anyway, she's got a chapter in there. But one of the things that bugged me, I knew she would be passing away. She was sick, and I was paying attention, but I couldn't pay attention and memorize. It's like, what am I going to carry when she passes? I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. And when she passed, I was sad, upset, angry. But but since that happened, things have happened here to where it's like, oh, something was transmitted. There was a slight little light came across. So in the first, and I'm glad that I have that. And so initially there was the sadness there, but it is sad that she left. But there's the joy that I have that I haven't met her. And not only that, I'll say this, the karma with that meeting is continuing on and has altered my trajectory.
Absolutely.
I'm here because of her.
Yep. And I can't tell you how many times in my own Dharma life I've had a similar realization. This or that in my Dharma life didn't go well, but because of that, I'm here. I'm practicing, right? Okay, those weren't ideal conditions, and still somehow, right? Because of all the karmic influences, practice is happening, right? We never know. We never know. Other things in this room? Please, Casey.
As you're speaking of the conundrum of being on the road to Nirvana, yet immersed in it, on the path to enlightenment, yet we're already enlightened, I received a metaphor transmission that's bringing me some comfort in the moment. Of like, if you have a favorite movie you've watched over and over, like Casablanca or Star Wars or whatever it is, you know the ending is you're well familiar with it, but you're so engaged with everything that's happening in the moment. So that's how I can be fully engaged with whatever's going on, know the outcome is assured.
Right. Absolutely. Well, you know, Buddha predicted Buddhahood for us all.
Yeah.
So, and we already know Nirvana is here, awakening is here, right? So, yeah, it's like kind of, we know the ending of the movie, and yet there's something really important about being engaged in this moment of that heroic march. How are we going to embody, transmit, practice with, whatever that is? That's important, right? So we know the ending. If we're only focusing on the ending, we're missing something. Right? So there is something comforting about it's okay. We know we're okay, and still there's work to do, and interesting, meaningful, juicy work to do. Right? Right or no?
I think Alan wants it, something like that. The nature of the dance is not to get to the end.
Yes. Other things in this room? Folks at home, anything from any of you today? Questions, comments, reflections? Suggestions, things to add? Everyone feeling okay? Ado, are you joining us to add something? Just joining us so we can look at you? All right, good to see you. My Dharma sister Ado is in Minneapolis. Okay. Anything else we want to say or ask before we move into ceremony? Last minute logistical questions related to any of this? We're going to just do things together and do the best we can, right? So I was just saying to somebody earlier, you know, the important thing about these ceremonies is the sincerity, right? The wholeheartedness, the intention. And, you know, certainly nobody should be paralyzed with fear. This is a human community. And on the other hand, if we approach this, oh, well, ha ha, we'll just muddle through it somehow. No, right? We need to do the very best we can for Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. We need to do the very best we can. So we make a mistake. Okay, we made a mistake. We're moving on. But let's please do the best we can, right? So we're going to follow along, fold in with others, watch what others are doing, fully participate, right? Okay, let's move on to honoring Buddha's parinirvana. Okay, thank you.